"Want half of my cookie?" asked the homeless boy to the sad, widowed millionaire. Richard Wilson sat on the same bench in Liberty Square in New York City every December night for 3 years. The 60-year-old businessman had lost his way in life after his wife Elizabeth passed away, leaving him alone with a fortune that no longer held meaning. It was on a chilly Christmas Eve when a ragged boy of about 6 approached him. The child wore a worn-out wool hat and a coat several sizes too big for his thin frame. In his small hands, he held an old hard cookie. "Do you want half of my cookie?" the boy asked, looking straight into Richard's tired eyes. The businessman froze. In 3 years of solitude on that bench, no one had ever spoken to him with such simplicity. His reputation as a cold and calculating man in business was well known throughout New York City, yet here was a child offering his only meal to a complete stranger. "I don't need it, thank you," Richard replied, trying to maintain his usual detachment. But the boy didn't give up. Carefully, he broke the cookie in half and held out the larger piece to Richard. "My mom always said sharing makes food last longer in the heart," the boy said, smiling despite his dirty teeth and hollow cheeks. Richard stared at that piece of hard cookie as if it were the most precious thing in the world. Something inside him shattered. He accepted the cookie with trembling hands and swallowed hard when he realized it was the only food the child had that day. "What's your name?" Richard asked, his voice softer than it had been in years. "Ethan. And you?" "Richard." "Where do you live, Ethan?" The boy pointed toward the shadows behind the mall. "I have a nice warm cardboard house over there. What about you? Do you live in those big buildings you can see from here?" Richard nodded, feeling a tightness in his chest. Ethan explained that he always saw the well-dressed man sitting on that bench, always with the same sad expression, and he wanted to help because sadness is worse than hunger. When Richard tried to give the boy money, Ethan firmly refused. "My dad always said charity makes you small inside. I just like to share." That response echoed in Richard's mind all night. For the first time in 3 years, he couldn't sleep thinking of someone other than Elizabeth. The next day, Richard returned to the square earlier. He found Ethan curled up behind a tree, shivering from the cold with a feverish forehead. Without hesitation, he carried the boy to his car and drove straight to Mount Sinai Hospital. "Please help me. This child is very sick," Richard shouted as he rushed into the emergency room. The doctors hurried to attend to Ethan, but soon came the questions Richard couldn't answer. What was the child's full name? Who were his guardians? Where were his documents? "He's a street child," Richard explained to Dr. Sarah Johnson, who took charge of the case. "I found him sick in the square. Mr. Wilson, from what I see in the tests, this child has severe pneumonia. He needs to be hospitalized for at least a week. But there are protocols to follow. We've already called social services." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing, Jennifer Davis, the hospital's social worker, arrived 2 hours later. She was a serious woman in her 40s with eyes that seemed to see right through people. "Mr. Wilson, I need to understand your relationship with this child," she said, reviewing her notes. "You're not a relative, not a legal guardian, and from what I gather, you've only known the boy for 2 days. "That's correct. But he needs urgent medical care. And are you willing to cover the costs of the treatment?" "Of course I am." Jennifer narrowed her eyes. Why would a millionaire businessman care so much about a street kid? The question hit Richard like a punch. He didn't even know how to answer it himself. During Jennifer's questioning, Richard learned that Ethan had run away from a shelter on the east side of New York City 3 months ago. The boy preferred living on the streets to going back there. "What happened at the shelter?" Richard wanted to know. "I can't give details, but there were complaints. The place was temporarily closed for investigation." While Ethan slept under sedation, Richard stayed by his side. That's when he received a call that would change everything. "Richard, what on earth are you doing?" The shrill voice of Catherine Wilson, his sister-in-law, echoed through the phone. "How did you know I was here?" "I got a call from someone at the hospital. They said you're paying for some random kid's treatment. Have you completely lost your mind?" Richard sighed. Catherine was Elizabeth's younger sister, and since his wife's passing, she had become increasingly controlling over the family's inheritance. "It's none of your business, Catherine. None of my business, Richard. You're spending money that should go toward our family's future on strangers. Elizabeth wouldn't have wanted this. Don't you dare speak for Elizabeth. I'm coming over right now. We need to talk." Catherine arrived at the hospital like a hurricane. Tall, blonde, and always impeccably dressed, she stood out in the hospital setting like a sore thumb. "Where's this kid who's draining our inheritance?" she snapped as soon as she spotted Richard in the hallway. "Keep your voice down, he's sleeping." "Oh, he's sleeping? How nice. In a suite that costs $3,000 a day." "The money is mine, Catherine. It was Elizabeth's too, and Elizabeth always wanted to help needy children through proper institutions, not funding a widower's midlife crisis." The argument was interrupted by a faint moan from the room. Ethan had woken up and, delirious with fever, began to speak. Daddy, don't go. Mommy said you'd come back." Richard rushed to the bedside and held Ethan's small, feverish hand. "I'm here, Ethan. I'm not going anywhere." "Daddy, I dreamed I had a real family, a house with a yard." Catherine watched the scene with wide eyes. When Ethan fell back asleep, she exploded. "Are you hearing this? He's calling you Daddy. Richard, you're replacing Elizabeth and the child you lost with this street kid." Richard turned to his sister-in-law with an expression she'd never seen before. "Stop, now." "I won't stop. You're having a psychotic break. You need medical help, not to sit here feeding fantasies." "Catherine, if you don't leave right now, I'll make you leave." "Are you threatening me? Perfect. That just proves you've completely lost your sanity." Catherine stormed out, but Richard knew this was far from over. She wasn't the type to give up easily, especially when money was involved. Dr. Michael Thompson, the hospital's cardiologist, approached Richard on the third day of Ethan's stay. "Mr. Wilson, I need to speak with you about Ethan. Is something wrong?" "Besides pneumonia, we've discovered he has a congenital heart condition. It's treatable, but it requires surgery and years of follow-up care." Richard felt the ground disappear beneath him. "How much will the full treatment cost?" "We're looking at between $500,000 and $1 million, depending on complications." "Do whatever's necessary." "Mr. Wilson, there's another issue. To authorize a surgery of this magnitude, we need a family member to sign the documents. You'd have to start the process for temporary custody or adoption." That night, Richard didn't sleep. He watched Ethan struggle to breathe, connected to various machines. The boy woke up around 3 in the morning. "Mr. Wilson, am I really sick?" "You'll get better, Ethan, I promise. If I don't be sad, okay? At least I met a real dad before I..." "Don't talk like that. You'll get better and we'll have plenty of time together." "Really? You really want to be my dad?" Richard held back tears. "Only if you want an old, stubborn father like me." Ethan smiled for the first time since arriving at the hospital. "I really do, I always have." The next day, Richard sought out Dr. James Robertson, his lawyer of 15 years. "James, I need to start an adoption process." "Richard, are you sure about this? It's a very serious decision." "I've never been more certain of anything in my life." "All right, but I have to warn you, there are complications. I got a strange call yesterday." "What kind of call?" "Someone is questioning your mental health. A petition is being prepared to have you declared incompetent." Richard froze. "Catherine, I can't confirm it, but the signs point that way. Richard, if this goes through, you could lose control over your assets and your legal decision-making power." "Including the adoption?" "Including the adoption." That afternoon, Jennifer Davis returned to the hospital with bad news. "Mr. Wilson, we've received an anonymous complaint questioning your psychological fitness to care for a child." "That's a lie." "Maybe. But now we're required to follow stricter protocols. Ethan will have to be moved to a temporary shelter until this is resolved." "No, he's sick. He needs surgery." "The surgery can be done through the public system. He'll be transferred to City General Hospital." Richard knew this was a death blow. In the public system, Ethan would be put on a waiting list that could take months. The boy didn't have that kind of time. That night, Richard made a desperate decision. He asked to speak to Ethan alone. Ethan, they want to take you somewhere else, like the shelter I lived in before. Maybe worse, but I'll fight to bring you back. Do you trust me? I do, Dad, Richard. It was the first time Ethan had called him that while awake and aware. Richard wanted to remember that moment forever. Then I need you to be brave, really brave, and never forget. I'm coming back for you. Ethan nodded, but Richard saw fear in the boy's eyes. The next day, Jennifer came to take Ethan. The boy clung to Richard as if his life depended on it. Don't let them take me, Dad, Richard, please. I'll come for you, son, I promise. You really promise? I promise. Watching Ethan being led away was the second worst pain Richard had ever felt. The first was losing Elizabeth and the child they'd expected 20 years ago. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now back to the story. Richard threw himself into the legal battle with the fury of a man who had nothing left to lose. He hired the best lawyers in New York City and discovered Catherine had indeed filed for guardianship, claiming he suffered from severe depression and made irrational decisions. The first hearing was set for 2 weeks later. Richard used that time to gather evidence of his mental stability and financial capability. He underwent psychiatric evaluations, collected documents from his company, and secured testimonies from employees. But Catherine wasn't idle. She'd hired Gregory Palmer, a lawyer known for winning impossible cases using questionable methods. Your Honor, Gregory said during the hearing, my client has exhibited erratic behavior for the past 3 years. He spends fortunes on strangers, abandons his company, lives in isolation. Now he wants to adopt a child he met on the street, spending millions on medical treatments. Mr. Wilson, addressed Judge William Blackwell, can you explain your motivations? Richard stood up. He had rehearsed that moment hundreds of times. Your Honor, my wife Elizabeth and I lost a son 20 years ago. He would be Ethan's age today. I'm not trying to replace anyone. I'm trying to honor my family's memory by doing something they always wanted, helping children in need. And why this child specifically? Because Ethan taught me something I had forgotten, that sharing is the only way to multiply what truly matters. Catherine stood up immediately. Your Honor, this proves exactly what we've been saying. My brother-in-law is romanticizing a situation that's purely psychological. The judge called for silence and announced he needed time to review the case. The decision would come in 10 days. Those were the longest 10 days of Richard's life. He visited Ethan at the shelter every permitted day, but saw the child grow weaker with each visit. The boy had been on a waiting list for surgery for 2 weeks, and his heart condition was worsening. On the 8th day, the unthinkable happened. Ethan ran away from the shelter. Richard received a frantic call from Jennifer. Mr. Wilson, Ethan is missing. We're searching all over the city. Richard rushed to Liberty Square, the only place where it made sense for Ethan to go. He found the boy unconscious behind the bench where they had first met, his lips purple and his breathing irregular. This time, Richard didn't care about protocol. He took Ethan straight to Mount Sinai and authorized the emergency surgery himself. Mr. Wilson, said Dr. Michael Thompson, without legal authorization, this could bring serious consequences for you. Doctor, save his life first. We'll deal with the consequences later. The surgery lasted 8 hours. Richard paced the waiting room until Dr. Thompson appeared, still in surgical scrubs. The surgery was a success. Ethan will make a full recovery. Richard collapsed into a chair and cried as he hadn't since losing Elizabeth, but the joy was short-lived. The next morning, Catherine arrived at the hospital with 2 social workers and a court officer. Richard Wilson, you are in contempt of a court order. This child must be transferred back to the shelter immediately. He just had heart surgery. The doctors said he can be transferred. We're taking him now. Then something unexpected happened. Ethan, weak but conscious, got out of bed and slowly walked up to Catherine. Are you Daddy Richard's mean aunt? Catherine was taken aback. I'm not mean, child. I'm trying to protect my brother-in-law. Protect him from doing something good? You don't understand, it's complicated. Ethan looked at her with his big, serious eyes. Do you have a family? Yes, a husband and 2 children, and a home, a big house, and food every day. Of course. Then why don't you share? I, who had nothing, always shared. Always. You who have everything won't share even a little. The silence that followed was deafening. Catherine stared at the boy as if seeing a ghost. I never thought of it that way. My mom said people who have a lot but don't share end up with small hearts. Is your heart small? A tear rolled down Catherine's cheek. She looked at Richard, then at Ethan, then at the social workers. Wait outside. I need to speak with my brother-in-law. When they were alone, Catherine approached Ethan's bed. I'm sorry, Ethan. I think my heart really was too small. But it can grow again. The heart can always grow. Catherine turned to Richard. Richard, I was afraid. Afraid of what? Afraid you'd forget me. Afraid you'd forget Elizabeth. After she left, you're all I have left of my sister. Richard finally understood. Catherine wasn't trying to protect the inheritance. She was trying to protect Elizabeth's memory and her place in Richard's life. Catherine helping Ethan doesn't mean forgetting Elizabeth. It means honoring everything she taught me about love and compassion. I know that now. That boy reminded me of who I was before I became obsessed with money and possessions. Ethan gave a weak smile. So now we're a real family, with Aunt Catherine too. Catherine looked at Richard for permission. He nodded. If you want, Ethan, if you want, I'd love to be your aunt. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot, as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. Catherine's change of heart was crucial for the case. She withdrew the guardianship petition and began supporting the adoption process. But there were still legal hurdles to overcome. Judge William Blackwell scheduled a new hearing to hear Ethan directly. It was unusual, but the case had taken on unique aspects. Ethan, the judge said gently, do you want to stay with Mr. Richard? Yes, very much, Your Honor. He's a real father. How do you know he's a real father? Because when I was scared, he held my hand. When I was sick, he stayed up to take care of me. And when I offered half my cookie, he shared it without making me feel less important. What if I told you could have a new family with younger people? Ethan shook his head firmly. I already have a family. I have Dad Richard and Aunt Catherine. And they have me. Family isn't who you're born with. Family is who chooses to stay with you. The judge was visibly moved. After a pause, he announced his decision. The adoption petition is granted. Mr. Richard Wilson, you are now the legal father of Ethan Wilson. The courtroom was silent. Then it erupted in applause from lawyers, staff, and even Jennifer, who had followed the case from the start. Richard hugged Ethan so tightly, he worried he might hurt him. It's official now, son. You're my boy forever. And you're my dad forever? Forever and then some. But life still had surprises in store for the new family. On the day Ethan was discharged from the hospital, Alfred Johnson, the Wilson family butler for 30 years, approached Richard. Mr. Richard, I need to show you something I've kept all these years. Alfred handed Richard a wooden box he recognized immediately. It was where Elizabeth kept her most precious things. Mrs. Elizabeth asked me to give this to you when the time was right. I believe that time has come. Inside the box were handwritten letters from his wife. Richard opened the first with trembling hands. My dearest Richard, if you're reading this, it means you found your way back to life. I always knew you'd do it through a child. You were born to be a father, my love. Don't let my leaving stop you from loving again. Find a child who needs you as much as you need them. Turn our pain into love for someone who hasn't had the chance to be loved. Elizabeth. Richard cried as he hadn't in years. Richard cried as he hadn't. Ethan, who was playing with a new toy car on the floor, came closer. Dad Richard is sad. No, son, Dad Richard is very happy. He's happy because your mother Elizabeth already knew you'd come into our lives. She really knew. She did. And she loved you even before you were born. So I have a mom in heaven and a dad here on earth? That's right. And there's also an Aunt Catherine who loves you very much. Ethan's adjustment to his new life wasn't without challenges. The boy had spent 6 years in extreme poverty and needed to relearn many basic things. He didn't know how to use a fork and knife, was afraid of taking hot showers, and hid food under his bed. Richard had endless patience. He taught Ethan to read and write, hired a child psychologist to help with his trauma, and most importantly, showed the boy he would never go without again. But Ethan brought his own lessons. He insisted on doing small chores around the house to pay for his stay, even after being told it wasn't necessary. "Daddy, Richard, if I don't work, how will I learn to be useful?" "Ethan, children don't need to be useful. They need to play and study." "But I like helping. It makes my heart feel big." Richard understood this was important for the boy's dignity. He let Ethan help Alfred with small tasks in the garden and kitchen. Watching Ethan work gave Richard an idea that would change not just their lives, but the lives of hundreds of other children. "Catherine, I want to talk to you about a project." "What kind of project?" "I want to turn the company into a social enterprise. Create opportunities for dignified work for at-risk children and youth." "Richard, that's a huge shift. Are you sure?" "Ethan taught me that work gives dignity, even when you're small. How many kids like him are out there, just wanting a chance to prove their worth?" Catherine, who had completely transformed since meeting Ethan, enthusiastically supported the idea. "Let's do this together. For Elizabeth, for Ethan, and for all the children we'll help." The New Tomorrow project launched 6 months later. Richard converted part of his business into a social enterprise offering vocational training for vulnerable youth aged 14 to 18. But the real innovation was creating a program for younger children like Ethan had been. Instead of a traditional shelter, they set up supervised family homes where small groups of children lived with trained caregivers and learned age-appropriate skills. Ethan became the project's first ambassador. At just 6 years old, he helped welcome new children and showed them rebuilding their lives was possible. "Look," Ethan would tell each new child, "here no one gives you anything for free, but no one lets you go without either. You'll work a little, study a little, and play a lot." The project grew beyond all expectations. Within 2 years, 5 homes were running, serving over 200 children. The media took interest, but Richard avoided interviews. "Daddy, why don't you want to talk on TV?" asked Ethan, now 8 and far wiser about the world. "Because this isn't about me, son, it's about you, about kids who deserve a chance. But people need to know they can really help, not just by giving money, but by giving work." Ethan was right. Richard agreed to a national TV interview on the condition Ethan could join. "Mr. Wilson," the reporter asked, "what inspired this project?" "A simple question. Want half my cookie?" "My son Ethan taught me that sharing is the only way to multiply what truly matters." "Ethan, what's it like living with your adoptive father?" "He's not my adoptive father. He's my real father. A real father is the one who cares, not the one who made you." The interview went viral. Business leaders across the United States reached out, wanting to replicate the project in their cities. But the real test for the family came in their 3rd year together. Ethan, now 9 years old, began asking questions about his birth mother. "Daddy Richard, do you know what happened to my real mum?" Richard had prepared for this question with the help of his therapist. "I do, son. She got very sick when you were a baby and couldn't take care of you." "Didn't she want me?" "She loved you very much, Ethan, but sometimes loving means letting go so the person we love can have a better life." "Like Mommy Elizabeth, who's in heaven. Did she let you go so you could find me?" Richard was moved by the boy's maturity. "Exactly, son. Sometimes the people we love the most give us gifts even after they're gone." "So am I Mommy Elizabeth's gift to you?" "The greatest gift I've ever received." On the 4th anniversary of their meeting, Ethan prepared a surprise for Richard. He had saved money from small jobs. Richard gave him a modest allowance to teach financial responsibility and bought an entire box of cookies. On Christmas Eve, just like that first night, Ethan took Richard to the bench in Liberty Square. "Daddy Richard, do you want half my cookie?" But this time Ethan had a whole box, and this time they weren't alone. Catherine was there, along with Alfred and several children from the New Tomorrow project. "Today I can share with everyone," Ethan announced, opening the box and passing out cookies to each person. Richard watched his son spread joy just as he had shared that first old, hard cookie. The difference was that now Ethan didn't have to choose between having or sharing. He could do both. "Daddy, remember when you said you didn't need my cookie?" "I do. You were wrong. You needed it so much, not the cookie. You needed to remember how good it feels to share." Richard hugged Ethan as they watched the children eat cookies and laugh in the Christmas-decorated square. "You're right, son. I really needed to learn that. And I really needed a dad, so we helped each other, right? We helped each other, and now we're helping other kids do the same." Ethan smiled and took a bite of his cookie. "Daddy, can I tell you a secret?" "Of course, son. I knew you'd be my dad from the first time I saw you." "How did you know?" "Because you were the first grown-up who looked at me like I mattered, and people who matter take care of each other." Richard's heart swelled with pride and love. Ethan had grown so much, but he was still that wise little boy who had changed his life with a simple act of generosity. 5 years later, the New Tomorrow project had spread to 15 states in the United States. Ethan, now 14, had become a thoughtful, responsible young man who split his time between school and volunteering for the project. Richard, at 69, had found a purpose that gave meaning to every day of his life. Catherine had become the project's executive director and discovered a calling she never knew she had. "Daddy," Ethan said one Saturday morning, "I have an idea to expand the project." "What's your idea?" "What if we started a community bakery? The kids could learn to bake bread and cookies and sell them to the neighborhood. They'd learn a skill while helping support the project." Richard smiled. Ethan had inherited not just his generous heart, but also his business sense. "That's an excellent idea, son. Let's talk to Aunt Catherine about it." "Daddy, can I ask you something personal?" "Of course." "Do you still feel sad when you think about Mommy Elizabeth?" Richard thought for a moment. "Sometimes. Missing someone never fully goes away. But I've learned we can feel both longing and gratitude at the same time." "Gratitude for what?" "Because she taught me how to love, and because she prepared me to be your father." Ethan hugged Richard. "Daddy, thank you for accepting half of my cookie that night. Thank you for offering it, son. Thank you for teaching me that the greatest treasure in the world can fit in the palm of a small hand when that hand is willing to share." At that moment, Richard knew he had fulfilled the promise he made to Elizabeth 20 years earlier. He had turned her pain into love for someone who needed to be loved. And in the process, he discovered that when we share our life with someone, it doesn't grow smaller. It grows infinitely larger. End of story. Now tell us, do you believe simple gestures can change lives forever? Which part of the story touched your heart the most? Share your thoughts in the comments and tell us about an act of generosity that marked your life. Your story may inspire others. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel for more heartwarming stories like this one. Thank you so much for being here with us.